This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 10th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3, do you think, was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The Gospel of the Lord. So almost from the very beginning, Christians have referred to the parable in today's Gospel reading as the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is in spite of the fact that Jesus does not use the word good to describe the Samaritan. And moreover, the phrase Good Samaritan is actually kind of a slur. In our day, it would be like saying the good terrorist. Pretty much no Jew in Jesus' day thought that any Samaritan was particularly good or praiseworthy. And there were a variety of ethnic, cultural, and religious reasons why this animosity existed. But it's also the case that Samaritans did not like Jews. The general disdain was a two-way street. And you may recall from a couple Sundays ago that the disciples entered a town of the Samaritans on their way to Jerusalem. The Samaritans threw them out because Samaritans didn't like Jews any more than Jews like Samaritans. And so, of course, when Jesus tells this story and he makes the Samaritan the hero of the story, it's shocking. And that shock effect is probably one of the reasons that it was remembered and written down. But 2,000 years later, as we read the story of the Good Samaritan, we're not shocked at all. We think that, of course, this guy is a good guy. Moreover, he's probably a really nice guy. He's just been ethnically stereotyped, and maybe even he and the poor guy on the road were destined to become good friends. But that would not have been how Jesus' first listeners would have imagined this guy. Not only did they not like Samaritans, but they also knew that most Samaritans did not like them. And far from thinking, gee, maybe this Samaritan's going to be different, they would have thought, why would somebody who basically despises us stop and help us? I mean, could you even trust such a person? And indeed, that seems to be one of the keys to understanding this parable. So for a moment, let's consider this story from the point of view of the first listeners that Jesus had. Let's suppose that they would have imagined that this Samaritan is not inclined to like the guy in the ditch. He has no personal, warm, fuzzy feeling for the victims of the robbers or for Jewish people in general. He is not the good person that we usually imagine him to be. And yet, it's this Samaritan who really doesn't like the half-dead guy in the ditch, who acts as a neighbor. And if the Samaritan is a character who really doesn't like this guy in the first place, then this story seems to imply that being a neighbor means focusing on the need of the other person, not necessarily the person himself or herself. I mean, initially, like the priest and the Levite, the Samaritan can only tell that there is a naked, half-dead guy laying in the ditch. He may presume that he's Jewish, but he really doesn't know. Yet, he does not have compassion on the person because he feels warm and fuzzy to him. He has compassion because of the need that he sees. And that's actually what the word means in Greek. Compassion is about being moved because of the situation, not because you like the person or because the person is worthy of your help. The Samaritan, as neighbor, focuses on the need, even if, as likely, he doesn't know and probably would not like this person. And if the Samaritan doesn't really like this guy, it means that being a neighbor means disregarding your own reputation. I mean, perhaps one of the reasons that Jesus makes the Samaritan the hero of the story is that any of the others, the priest, the Levite, or the Israelite, which is what people would have expected, any of those people. So that's the other thing sometimes we don't realize about this story. Rabbis in Jesus' day routinely told stories which there were three guys, kind of like Larry, Moe, and Curly. There was the priest, the Levite, and the Israelite. That's how it went. The priest, the Levite, the Israelite, the priest, the Levite, the Israelite, and all of a sudden Jesus comes along and says the priest, the Levite, the Samaritan. And that is not the way the story goes. But any of those other people, the priest, the Levite, the Israelite, if they had gone home and said, I got delayed because I helped this poor guy on the road, I helped a fellow Jew, all of them would have been, patted on the back by their friends and their neighbors and said, what a good guy you are. You helped a fellow Jew, that's great. The Samaritan will not have that experience. In fact, the Samaritan probably doesn't want this to be known at all. And he would be just as happy if none of his friends found out about his good deed. You know, like when you say to people, you help them out and you say, no, really, don't mention it. Really, don't mention this. And ironically, maybe the Samaritan acts as neighbor precisely because he figures out on the road in the middle of no place, nobody's going to find out about what he's done. He does the thing that he knows he's supposed to do, especially because nobody is going to give him any credit for it. And this story also implies that being a neighbor is about taking what you have and using it to help somebody else. Just taking what you've got. Probably both the priest and the Levite had the simple things that the Samaritan had. Oil and wine, a couple of coins. I mean, this was your basic first aid kit, oil and wine. Everybody who was a traveler would have had those things, including the guy in the ditch who had them before he got mugged and all that stuff got stolen. All travelers would have been able to do that. But perhaps the others thought, well, you know what? He's really beyond my help. He's already half dead. It's unlikely I'm going to be able to save him. And maybe, probably in fact, many of Jesus' first listeners would have seen situations like that, and they would have been right. Some of those people would have been beyond help. Often, those kinds of experiences cause people to want to walk by on the other side. But the Samaritan, as neighbor, uses what he has to help, not because he has more optimism that somehow he can save this guy and maybe this guy will really recover, but simply because he has the opportunity to try. And he sees being a neighbor as using the opportunity, not simply thinking, oh, I have more optimism than all the rest. And Jesus' point in using the shocking character of the Samaritan to become the hero of the story is not to get his fellow Jews to rethink their views of Samaritans, although in other places, Jesus may want that as well. Rather, he uses this particular story to twist the question. This is often what Jesus does in parables. He twists things around. You may recall that the story starts out when the lawyer asks Jesus, who is my neighbor? That is, who's the other guy? And which other guys count as my neighbors? But as Jesus concludes the story, he twists the question and he says, which person was the neighbor? That is to ask, who are you as a neighbor? How are you going to act as a neighbor? And that's really the question Jesus is still asking. Who are we as neighbors? How do we live as neighbors? Sometimes it occurs to me that I get hung up on all this good stuff. This is the good Samaritan. So you're supposed to be good if you're a neighbor. What if I don't feel particularly good? What if I'm not in a good mood today, which is a lot lately? How can I be a neighbor unless I'm really good? What if I don't feel warm and fuzzy towards those who may need my help? What if I don't like them right now, and I will not like them later on either? In many ways, Jesus' parable here tells us that those things are really beside the point. Instead, for us also, the point of living as the neighbors that God calls us to be is really about focusing on the needs of others, not their personal attributes. That's why we can help people we do not know and will never know. And it's why it's possible and sometimes even necessary to help people we do not like and we do not agree with. Because it's not about them, but about their legitimate needs, about the needs God wants us to address. In the end, the lawyer, who you notice cannot even bring his lips to say the word Samaritan out of them because it's so repulsive to him, he answers the question of Jesus about who's the neighbor by saying, the one who showed mercy. And mercy, by definition, is something given to somebody who does not deserve it. For us too, being a neighbor means disregarding our own reputation. You know, the thought in the back of all of our minds all the time about what's in it for me, that's a powerful force in our lives. And sometimes it can cause us to move on from the kind of helping which will not get us much of any kind of recognition to things which will earn us praise, acclaim, or at least at the end of the day make us sit back and go, you know, I did something good today. I feel good about myself. That's usually the kind of helping that I would want to do, because lots of times I'm in my situation where maybe you are too, where I can do this or this or this, but you know this thing over here, if I do that, I'm going to sit back at the end of the day and I'm going to go, that was pretty good. I feel good about myself for doing that. But sometimes, as this parable points out, the kind of help God calls me to give and the kind of neighbor that God calls me to be means doing the right thing even when you would just as soon nobody found out about it. Even when I think I didn't really want to help that person, but that was really what God wanted me to do. And sometimes for us too, being neighbor simply means being willing to use what we actually have to help, instead of waiting for somebody else to come along the road and take care of it, or just complaining about the problem. You know, the Samaritan in the story, he could probably help one guy. If he had found 3 or 4 more guys, he probably would not have had the resources to help them. But he took what he had for one person because he could do that. And, you know, sometimes today, when we're faced with these dramatic situations of, you know what, things are just really horrible, we throw up our hands and go, you know, I can't solve world hunger. I can't provide backpacks for 3,000 kids. And so people throw up their hands and they go, well, you know, somebody else is going to have to take care of this. Instead of us taking the small numbers of things that we have and say, you know what, I can donate a few school supplies. I can bring in a few cans of food for Gaithersburg Help. I can do something myself to help with the problem. Instead of just throwing up my hands or doing what a lot of my buddies do and posting righteous indignation on social media about how terrible the problem is. The Samaritan took what he had and did what he could. And sometimes that's what God calls us to do, to be neighbors as well. You know, in the final analysis, one of the most shocking things about this parable is that the Samaritan is actually the character who most emulates God. Because in Jesus, God has become a neighbor to us by focusing on our needs, not our worthiness. In Jesus, God has become a neighbor to us by disregarding his own need for praise and emptying himself on a cross. And in Jesus, God has become a neighbor to us by taking what he has and using it to help us. And therefore, the point of being the neighbor is not to earn the love of God, which we've already got, or, like the lawyer, to think that somehow by being a neighbor, we can earn our way into heaven. Instead, Jesus calls us to be neighbors so that we can be people who are instruments of God in the lives of others, and so that through us, God can work to be the neighbors that others need.